Ukraine blows up Putin's top general in Moscow, and Donald Trump talks about new deal regarding war in Ukraine. These and other topics we will discuss right now. My name is Irina Uzlova, and as you see, we have today our guest, Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report, a communication instructor at the University of Wisconsin, and a country supervisor in Rock Country, Wisconsin. Yuri, hello, glad to see you very much.
Glad to see you, Irina, and welcome to our audience.
Thank you for joining us every week. Ukraine Security Service kills Russian General Igor Kirillov in Moscow. An explosion in Moscow kills Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, chief of the Russian Armed Forces Radiation, Chemical and Biological Defense Troops. The Security Service of Ukraine is behind the operation to eliminate him, according to our sources of our channel. The liquidations of war criminals, representatives of Putin's criminal army, have become more frequent lately, as we see. Can we say, Yuri, that war criminals will never find a quiet place anywhere else, that punishment will definitely find them, and that our special services are already tougher than Mossad? And does Putin realize that his turn will definitely come?
Well, I think while this is definitely an accomplishment, it hardly rivals the accomplishments of Mossad in its just in the past year, whether we're speaking about pagers or annihilation of a variety of terrorist leaders. But nonetheless, it is important and it is substantial, and I think that those that are concerned about war dragging on and whether there's now going to be retaliation from Putin, don't fully appreciate the situation, I think, in which Ukraine finds itself, where these types of maybe tactical victories are still nonetheless important, because I think justice being served, as in this case, is important, and sometimes the international court is too far, and this is war. This is whatever Russia wants to say, that this is a special military operation. It is clearly war. What I think is also worth noting is that in at least in the Western media, as I'm hearing responses and reactions to this, we're not just hearing about this general as the nuclear the force and the nuclear deterrence.
Chemical and biological defense troops. He lied about different chemical laboratories from USA in Ukraine, about different animals that are like a weapon against Russian Federation, and all about this West, this bad West for Russia.
Yes, and I think that his assassination only raised the profile of what it is that he did and what are the crimes that he is accused of having either committed or authorized, or just was in charge. So therefore, the responsibility rests with him. The question may be of how many other generals there are in Russia, and whether this is a form of a social elevator, as they sometimes refer to, a promotion now, because now this general needs to be replaced, his assistant needs to be replaced, his assistant needs to be replaced. This is it's an important part of how people get promoted in Russian military and perhaps in society as well. So I think on that level, it's interesting considering how corrupt Russian society is. Where did the information come from about this person being there and so close present to that electric scooter that supposedly blew up, and killed him? Was it perhaps his assistant that relayed the information, or was this a result of intelligence service work between the United States and Ukraine? Or, I think those kinds of logistical questions are interesting, and yet we may not get an answer to them because it is war. But another general, a Russian general, goes down. It's an old joke about attorneys, I believe. What do you call 1,000 lawyers at the bottom of the sea? Good start. So what do you call, another Russian general? Good job.
A very good job, and effective and impressive. And maybe, combat mosquitoes killed him. He spoke about such kind of mosquitoes. So Who knows?
Yes,
Maybe
they were concerned about militarized, dangerous mosquitoes, weaponized mosquitoes, I believe. Yeah, it's remarkable. But then again, I think where they're trying to the whole. With so much of what has been said is untrue, and especially when it comes from Russian side, that whether it's mosquitoes, whether it's electric scooter, I think that there's going to be a lot of questions. But the fact that this person is gone, kind of like Prigozhin is gone, certain things are final, and that seems to be one approach.
We taught such mosquitoes how to kill such criminal elements, Okay, move on. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has made some progress in brokering a ceasefire deal between Ukraine and Russia, he said during a press conference at his Mar-a-Lago residence on December 16. But Russian dictator Putin, Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov, and Russia's permanent representative to the United Nations Vasily Nebenzia all say in one voice that they don't even need a freeze on the war. Their goal is one and clear: to conquer Ukraine further. So my question is, how will Trump pursue Russia to negotiate, and what progress is he talking about?
Right now, from the statements that I heard from President-elect Donald Trump made at his press conference in regards to Ukraine, is his main focus is to end, as he calls it, carnage. That there's been so much destruction of Ukrainian cities, and as a real estate developer, he thinks in terms of buildings and structures. And so Donald Trump says that the Ukrainian cities, so many of them have been turned to, ruins, essentially. I don't remember exactly what word he's using, but word carnage is omnipresent in his conversations about Ukraine. And I guess in his worldview, if a building is demolished and the city is demolished, then there's no point of worrying about who owns that land, because the buildings are demolished anyway. And therefore, if architecture is destroyed, then it doesn't matter. It sounded to me like, from that logic, who owns the land, whether Putin or Ukraine, Russia or Ukraine. It seemed irrelevant to President-elect Trump in what I understood his comments to be. And I think that's just an important statement in understanding priorities, because this is also being said. A lot of this talk about carnage is done for the benefits of the viewers of the press conference. And those are going to be Americans who desperately want to feel better and good about their incoming president. And so we want to feel good. And so we're looking for, I think Donald Trump is looking to provide his viewers and, listeners with almost a justification for why peace on any terms is desirable and is better than war, because war is carnage. Carnage is bad. Carnage is awful. Let's stop the carnage. And the rest is kind of like details. But those are very important details, especially to people perhaps of those cities that maybe would want to come back to their cities and maybe rebuild those houses and build their future where their ancestors have lived. Maybe that's also an option that there's somebody would like to put out there. But at the moment, we're hearing mostly President Trump's point of view, which is incredibly important because he's the next president of the United States. He did acknowledge several times that he met with the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, and that I think to Mr. Trump's surprise, Mr. Zelensky sounds like he is now interested in peace, which for a long time, President Zelensky was speaking exclusively about regaining every bit of the Ukraine territory, returning to boundaries of 1991. But now it seems, according to President-elect Trump, that Mr. Zelensky seems to have changed his tune and is more willing to settle some kind of a peace. But of course, it comes down to whether Putin is interested in anything resembling a negotiation, and if he turns down any attempts and interludes by the administration of Donald Trump then what? And I think that that is a very dangerous situation that we just have to at least be clear that that is where the situation is currently headed. If something turns out where President Trump says, you know what, Vladimir Putin, you messed with the wrong guy. I'm going to flood Ukraine with weapons, and it's going to be unbelievable. Ukraine is going to be like, I don't know, second Israel plus Taiwan put together. That's going to be, Ukraine. That would be a surprise. Because at this point, that is not the direction that things are headed. In fact, I would say they're headed in the opposite direction. But the conversation about carnage is certainly going to put a lot of Americans at ease because, well, we need peace. Peace is better for people. That's self-evident. And that's the kind of conversation we're hearing right now in the United States.
But fair peace and fair finishing of this war, fair for Ukraine, I think so. And Yuri, during these last days with our experts, we think that, in fact, Donald Trump's administration doesn't have a plan about Russian-Ukrainian war. And we realize that Trump won't finish war for 24 hours, as he promised when he talked in pre-election period in the USA. Are we right?
You are correct, and the real question becomes then, if those things are correct, then what is Ukraine going to do? Because I think that is a question that we don't have an answer truly for, because we've seen Ukraine fight heroically with the aid of the United States. And whether there is a plan or there isn't a plan, I think there very well may be a plan, but we just may not like the plan that Donald Trump may have in mind. Because when it comes to certain things that are important to him, he has a very clear vision and plan, and with details, as the commission to discover what happened on investigate on January 6th showed, there were extensive plans. So I think that when it comes to things that matter, that are important, Donald Trump makes sure that the effort is put in by somebody and appropriate plans and visions, are made. So I think it's just a matter of this. I don't know if, Ukraine falls into the vision of a healthcare plan that Donald Trump still says he has a concept of a plan, healthcare for Americans, versus his plan for Afghanistan, which is where he made the agreement behind Afghanistan government's back with Taliban, with consequences that we all saw. The difference being is that this time around, if Ukraine falls, if Kyiv falls, this is going to look pretty directly bad, according to a lot of people, on Donald Trump. Of course, Donald Trump may not view it that way. He will probably say that this was precipitated by other people's actions. This is all Joe Biden's fault, somehow. But a lot of people will see, and a lot of people will not close their eyes. Whether that even matters in this new reality, in new America that we're about to enter, it's even unclear at this point whether this, with such a international catastrophe, can be laid responsibility at the feet of a president who threatens to punish his critics. So we don't even know an answer to that question. But I think that carnage is something that is very important for Donald Trump to stop, and how that is, how that takes place, and those kinds of things are less important. It almost smells like of the, when we look at the outcome of the elections, when we have a strong man in China, strong man in Russia, and potentially strong man in the United States, these are kind of like the superpowers we used to think, right? So now, yes, there's Europe and even Canada, but they can barely seem to figure out a lot of things. And the big so-called, strong man, this is something that we were warned about, that if we're going to have Donald Trump as president and the end of world order as we had it since World War II, that means that every country will just have to find a way to negotiate with its local strongman. And Ukraine has its own strong man who is very interested in being strong. So I think that's the division, but a division of spheres of influence was already done before, prior to World War II. And in spite of the result and outcome that it led to, it doesn't seem out of the question that these types of characters will want to divide spheres of influence just so they could concentrate more of their efforts into their spheres and focus their efforts. I think, again, this has been done before. It worked out, as we know, World War II, but it doesn't mean that they will stop trying.
NATO, which we believe that is a super powerful tool, takes over coordination of military aid to Kyiv from USA. Source of Reuters says about it. How do you think? Does NATO fear that Trump will leave the alliance alone to face Russian aggression?
Well, I think that when we talk about aliens, we don't even know what's going on with drones that are flying over the east coast of the United States for the most part. Although I think it may be going in, deeper into the country. We shall see. But in this new paradigm that we're entering, something like NATO that can potentially, by standing up against Russian aggression, therefore lead to war, is bad, potentially simply because there's a war that can occur. But if you have strong men that can just make peace with each other, then we, I guess, people left on the outside of the process can take comfort and solace in the fact that there is no active war breaking out in the world. And isn't that what we always said we wanted? World peace. So maybe that's just going to be another way to accomplish it. But NATO, I think, is going to, whether alliance of countries and states that are determined to stand against Russian aggression is called NATO or anything else, the point of such alliance is now more clear than ever. An alliance defending countries against Russian aggression is crucial. Whether it is going to be NATO, because it's not just going to be Hungary, it's going to be the United States that are going to put it mildly, ask a lot of questions before engaging in any action. If United States doesn't leave NATO outright, as was discussed during the first Trump administration. So I just don't know to what extent NATO is even a prize worth reaching for, however, a military alliance. And NATO currently is the strongest one. But I do not discount a possibility of another alliance forming if NATO doesn't work, because the need for such an organization is desperately there. But it has to be a functioning organization that is able to provide safety and security to its members. We will see NATO tested probably rather quickly after January 20th as well, because if Trump is not going to do anything to help Eastern European or Northern, allies of Baltic states, then who knows how long Putin will wait before he will decide to test it out. It could be a few years while he recovers from the special military operation or war in Ukraine, or it could be substantially shorter amount of time, depending on the things that variables that we may not be aware of. But if United States is really going to it's just going to have such a profound change of direction that it's really impossible to predict things, and the visions of different apocalyptic futures that are just presenting themselves to us on some level are endless.
The Institute for the Study of War analyzes Putin's latest statements about the Oreshnik threats and concludes that Putin is toning down the nuclear rhetoric. But can we conclude that whatever one may say, the Oreshnik threats and so on are aimed to undermine Western aid to Ukraine nowadays?
I think that when it comes to Putin's rhetoric, I expect escalation until January 20th, because it is very important for Putin to make sure that that United States does not get more involved in the war in Ukraine and doesn't come more to doesn't allow, let's say, I don't know, shooting to Tomahawks missiles on Moscow because something happens. So they're trying to, I think, in Kremlin to just kind of tap things down, keep everybody scared with Oreshnik, and just kind of freeze the situation as much as possible for just a few weeks more until they will have a truly different approach to foreign policy. And considering that on one hand, we're seeing a situation in the United States where civil society is taking a very quiet path forward, if I can put it this way, where we see media organizations already bowing down to Donald Trump, ABC News paying $15 million to settle with him, where in the past they could have just waited for courts to throw it out. But now they decided it was better in this situation to make peace. We're just entering a very unique, I guess, situation where we may have a peace and at the same time less freedom than we may be used to.
So can we say that a nuclear weapon and nuclear blackmail really are turning down from Putin?
I think that it's... The perception here is that we have our focus of attention has shifted to our internal issues of what's going on in the United States, and the fact that we have not heard anything since Oreshnik certainly points that there's been a decline in threats and rhetoric. But at the same time, it sounds, but at the same time, we're concerned that ultimately war situation is not being adequately addressed because the plan for peace that is presented by incoming Trump administration is not likely to actually lead to any long-lasting peace. So whether we're talking about Oreshnik now, whether we're going to be discussing it down the road, it's postponing a conversation that that will need to occur. But at this point, it seems that if we can just hold off until January 20th, then who knows what's going to be happening then, because rhetoric might be turned up and it can be used as justification for the incoming administration, for the new administration to say, well, we don't want to mess with this huge nuclear threat. Putin, he's so strong, and those cities are already leveled and destroyed, and those buildings are laying on their side, I guess. And so let's just give it to Putin. The question is, how do we respond to that rhetoric? I guess that's the key. Because if we're going to respond to this rhetoric with more escalation, then maybe there will be some thought about that rhetoric. But if we're going to be acting frightened and terrified every time that rhetoric is used, then it's only going to occur more often. Right now, people in charge are less terrified than perhaps people in charge who will be next.
We have a lot of threats from Putin, and we must realize all of them really, because risks are higher than ever, and we cannot even imagine sometimes what he has in his illness hat. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky should decide for himself when and under what conditions to sit down for negotiations. Joe Biden will support this decision until the end of his presidential term, states the coordinator for strategic communication at the U.S. National Security Council, John Kirby. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, said Kirby. We are not going to have conversations about them without their participations. We will not impose on them what their next steps should be, said Kirby. So, the current White House administration assumes that the future administration and Donald Trump can negotiate about Ukraine behind our backs. I understand. And what can current administration do for these 1 month they have before Trump's inauguration?
That is a good question, because everything that can be done should be done, and I think that some things will not be done, because one thing that could be done is to invite Ukraine to join NATO. That would be something that would be a pretty substantial thing. That would be a challenge for the incoming administration to easily dispose of, although it could easily, I mean, it's again, considering the the novel approach that they're going to be taking to governance, it's entirely possible that even inviting Ukraine to NATO will not stop an incoming administration from rescinding that invitation. But that is one of the things that President Biden could do. His administration is working hard, it appears, to transfer all the available aid to Ukraine now before January 20th, before Cinderella's ball is over and the clock strikes 12 and the carriage turns to pumpkin. Because I think it is also reasonable to expect that any permission that can be revoked by the incoming administration will be revoked, if not immediately, then very shortly. Again, if they're not revoked, if Ukraine is allowed to use those far-reaching weapons and shoot deep into Russian territory, that will be a surprise. So we will see what happens. But I think that the new administration is going to shift dramatically, and they're going to some level, they're going to make our heads spin. But it's a question of how much the new administration is going to be occupied with whatever happens in the United States versus being able to be involved in one way or another in helping Ukraine or in influencing Ukraine, because the United States does not have power over Ukraine. But United States, due to our amount of our help or assistance, has a lot of influence, and how that will going further is will be answered by Ukraine, because Trump president can pressure Ukraine as much as he wants or tries or wants, but it is up to Ukraine to agree to be pressured and to follow through. Until then, until January 20th, I think we're going to have the same rhetoric that we've heard from this White House since the beginning. It's kind of almost nostalgic to hear that and go, yes, I remember the days when we said nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. That was, oh yeah, it's still today, but it will be over very, very soon. And I think in the United States, that appreciation of that reality is what allows us to kind of look at it and say, this is how things should be done. Diplomacy done with respect for all involved. What consequences will it have? Well, voters of the United States chose a different direction with consequences that are going to affect not only people in the United States, but also people worldwide. And it's unfortunate because this inconsistency between administrations really hurts America's reputation. It really hurts how much people would trust such a country that can dramatically change its direction after the next presidential election, which means every 4 years. Of course, if we're going to have no other presidents, then I guess we will have a consistency of policy from here on out. But I do believe that presidents change, and it's considering what this incoming administration is going to do. It may be very difficult for the next administration to follow through with that as well. So this inconsistency in direction of American administrations certainly does do nothing good for America's reputation.
Yuri, thank you very much for this conversation and for your thoughts, for your analysis. See you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you. All the best to you. Take care, and we'll see you next week.
Take care too. Thank you very much. We'll try and we'll see. And we will discuss all our topics. They will have new vectors, I know, and we will see. Thank you. Goodbye. Yuri Rashkin, the host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report, was with me, Irina Uzlova, and with us. Thank you, our dears, for viewing this video. See you next week. Take care of yourself. Goodbye.